This morning's homily is from Matthew chapter 3, verses 13 to 17, about the baptism of Christ. When my son Dylan was about 4 years old, he came home one afternoon and told me about his day. It had been a difficult one. Something had happened and it upset him. Things had not gone like he wanted. I don't remember what happened, but whatever it was, it messed up his day. I listened as he told me all about it, and when he finished, I asked what he did. "Oh," he said, "I just dealt with it." I just dealt with it. There's a wisdom in what he said, and it applies to any age. I've held on to those words for the last 24 years. They remind me that whether we are 4 years old, 40, or 95, we all have situations asking to be dealt with. And here's what I mean by that. Have you ever had a situation you wanted to say no to? Something you didn't want to do or have to deal with? We all have those kind of stories. There's not one of us here today that has escaped to that. I think that's exactly where John the Baptist is in today's gospel. Jesus has come from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. It's something John never expected or foresaw. He didn't plan on this. "I need to be baptized by you." And he says to Jesus, "And do you come to me?" Baptizing Jesus does not fit John's expectation of who Jesus is and what he will do. What about the axe, the winnowing fork, the unquenchable fire? The order and structure of John's world are being turned upside down. Jesus is the more powerful one, and John is not worthy to carry his sandals. Jesus is supposed to increase and John decrease. Everything about this moment is contrary to what John believes, wants, and expects. And we've all been there. We know what that is like. What do you do when your prayer is not answered? The budget doesn't work out. Expectations are not met. What do you do when your plan doesn't come together? A relationship ends, or life is interrupted. What do you do when it's a hard day and you just want to say no and run away? Today's gospel sets before us two choices. We can either resist, forbid, and try to prevent what is coming to us, which is what John wants to do. Or we can permit it and let it be, which is what Jesus tells John to do. "Let it be so now," Jesus says to John. Then he consented. But what if that's to be our way too? What if Jesus is saying to us, "Let it be so now"? What if we too are being asked to consent? To consent to which Jesus calls us isn't simply about giving up, approving, or agreeing. It's about a way of life. It's about Jesus' way of life. It doesn't mean we have to like or want what is happening. It does, however, mean that we have to face it and deal with it. Consent means we show up to our life and be present to whatever it is before us and whatever is coming to us, even if it is difficult, painful, or the last thing we ever wanted. Consent isn't about being in control or having all the answers. It means we don't turn back or run away from what is in front of us. We don't have to do everything that is set before us, but neither can we resist doing what is ours. Consent doesn't mean passively accepting whatever happens. It means actively giving ourselves to the circumstances, relationships, and people before us. It's an act of risk and vulnerability. And it's a profession of faith, hope, and love. It means staying open and remaining receptive to whatever in that moment is being asked of us in the name of God. That's how Jesus lived his life. His life was a continual yes to the world, to you, and to me. He lived a life of consent. He consented to bring good news to the poor. He consented to welcome the outsider and the foreigner. He consented to hospitality for the hungry and thirsty. He consented to forgiveness for the woman caught in adultery. He consented to raise stinky Lazarus into the fragrance of new life. He consented to intimacy when Mary anointed and kissed his feet. He consented to compassion and healing for the blind, deaf, and lame. He consented to abundance when the wine ran out. He consented to be a servant of all and wash dirty feet. He consented to peace and non-violence in a world of swords. He consented to speak truth to power. He consented to struggle with God and himself in the Garden of Gethsemane. He consented to courage and perseverance as he took up and carried his cross. He consented to reconcile with Peter after being denied by him 3 times. He consented to humility when soldiers mocked and beat him. He consented to life in the face of death. Jesus never turned away, backed down, or withheld his consent. He was present and showed up to whoever and whatever was before him. Every time Jesus consented, he stepped into the river of humanity and immersed himself in the waters of your life and my life. Consent is an act of solidarity, a standing with one another. Jesus asked John to stand with him. Jesus stands with us, and he asks to stand with him in the river of humanity. That is how I want to live. I want to be a continual yes to the world and others. I want to live a life of consent. Don't you? I want to look back on my life and say, I just dealt with it. What would that look like for you today? What would it mean for us to give consent to the people and circumstances before you? It might be your marriage or parenting, at work or at church, caring for one another, speaking out and acting for justice, being present to one another, working on your recovery, healing a relationship, or setting out in a new direction. The opportunities for consent comes to us every day. Maybe you're being asked to consent to love, forgiveness, peace, reconciliation, compassion, welcome, courage, hope, and beauty. What is being asked of you today? Every time we consent, we wade into the deep waters of life. We stand with Jesus in the river of humanity, and together we fulfill all righteousness. Nothing gets left undone, and no one gets left out. Let it be so now. Consent to life. Amen.